And welcome to this series. Kelly Matthews and I am doing Miriam Bellamy on marriage and the family, coming from a Bowen family systems perspective, how it's different from conventional approaches, and how it really can add something different for families, for parents, for spouses, as they go through the challenges that marriage and family present. So Kelly, the last time we met, we took a little summer hiatus here. But the last time we met, we spoke about parenting. We spoke a lot more in depth about triangles and what the heck they are and why they're impactful. And we ended by beginning to think about triangles, the triangle we have with our parents. Bowen thought, as I understand it, that was the primary triangle in your life, was the relationship you had with your folks. And that when you work that triangle, it impacts everything else. So I wanted to start by talking about, how does that work? Your work on the triangle with your folks, what does that mean? And how does it impact your relationship with your kids and your spouse and how you operate in your own nuclear family?
Yeah, I think it's such an important topic. And I think that we, Bowen theory is for sure the standout with regard to this in terms of the focus on it. And I think that a lot of that goes back to biology. A lot of that goes back to the natural sciences, and that his take on that specifically was that that's just how the animal world works, that the important relationship, and I would say that particularly for humans, because we have the complexity in our lives that other animals don't have, although one might say other primates do, but certainly the complexity that we have in our lives as humans adds to that social mammal piece of connection and connectivity being paramount in human relationships. If we didn't have others, and this goes for other social mammals as well, if we didn't have others, we would just perish. We're just not a solitary people, biologically, not just like kind of like we don't like to be alone. It's not even preference, or people saying, well, I am kind of an introvert or I am an extrovert. It's nothing even to do with that. It's at a much deeper level in terms of biology. And I think that to me is sort of a solid place to just even start from, that these two people that we have, they're people for us, two other humans for us, that created us, have this idea that even now I'm thinking about it, even if we're only raised by one parent, right? It's still that idea that there's two people have to be involved in this. Mm-hmm. Is just paramount, I think, in terms of understanding how important that relationship is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're involved even if they're not in your life, right? Whether there's been a death or whether there's been a cutoff, there's been a divorce and you
never see them again,
right?
Or you go years without seeing a parent, or they just were uninvolved and another parent was deeply involved, or grandparents were raising kids. Mm-hmm. This goes to the question of adoption as well. We talk about that a lot. That gets questioned a lot in Bowen theory. What do you do with that? And I think for the most part, the people that I have had in therapy that have been adopted, we just talk about the family that they grew up in. If they happen to have known their biological family and have had relationships, then that plays a role. If they haven't had relationships with them, then it's sort of, you have to, individual situation, you have to see how much of that is of interest to someone, kind of digging through, for certificates and all of that. Some people are really interested in that, and I think that's good work that can get done. Other people have less interest in that, and I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that if they just want to stick with the family that raised them. Mm-hmm. So not to get off on that tangent, but I know that adoption is sometimes a thing that people will ask quite a bit about, just because of maybe a seeming confusion on that.
And we do have people listening who live in step families where they don't see their child, and they're really hurting with that.
Yes.
So we're speaking to, I know folks who are listening. So So, but thinking about this in terms, so you're talking about just contact with parents, whether contact or lack of contact, there's still this thinking about it. That even if one person in that kind of a triangle can be thinking about it, and if they can't be interactive, let's say in a cutoff situation or not,
Yeah.
they can be thinking about their own relationship with their parents.
Yes.
And I think it's important to emphasize it's not that we're looking, again, this is a differentiator from conventional. I just run into it over and over and over again. We're not looking for something wrong. The attachment theory, the foundation of attachment theory is something has gone wrong.
Sure.
Your mom wasn't enough, or she was too much. Your dad wasn't around, or he was too angry, or whatever it is. They're looking for something wrong, and we're not looking for that. We're looking for what's there, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So thinking about your own relationship. So how, thinking about my relationship with my parents, thinking about your relationship with your parents, how would that impact how you think about or deal with your kids or your spouse? You don't have to answer personally, but generally, like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think that is why starting with that biological idea is just paramount, because I think within the science field that just makes the most sense. Mm-hmm. That because people will say, especially adults, will say, you know what, I'm 50 years old. What my parents did, who cares? It doesn't matter. And I would just simply say, I don't think that the science bears that out, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So that's that one piece of that. I think that I am certainly convinced of that. And while I don't try to convince other people of it, I certainly think that by just asking questions about one's relationship with one's parents and one's reactivity towards one's parents, it can become quite clear to people, yeah, I am pretty reactive to that person. So if I'm not, we don't choose to be reactive to people, not that we choose that either, but we are not reactive to people that don't matter, that don't have some hook in us, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I think that you can get your way to that way of the idea behind this, the importance of it, the idea of the importance behind it, by asking the questions to people if they're in doubt of that. But again, not to convince people, but the idea, I think, that you started with, which was that getting that straight in your head, your relationship with your mother, your relationship with your father, is the basis of all other relationships that you're going to have with your siblings, certainly in your nuclear family growing up, but then outside, as you get older, toddlers and moving into school, social relationships with teachers, other people in authority, extended family members, of course, boyfriends, girlfriends, significant others, that world, moving, and then independence in terms of either moving out in college or after, and it just expands from there in terms of that. So I think that when we say, we being Bowen therapists, when we say it's important to get straight with your mom and dad, and that all other relations fall from that, again, going back to that biology piece, it's just super clear to me. Mm-hmm. that if those relationships, if the two relationships with your mom and dad can get in better contact, you can be in better contact with them, and you can have interesting and important personal information. I remember Margaret Donnelly saying a few years ago to a Bowen conference, are you sharing personal information? Because a lot of times people have a lot of contact with their parents, but it's pretty superficial. Oh, did I go out? Okay.
Oh, just a tiny.
So it's relatively superficial. Okay. Hi, how are you? How are you doing? Kind of the business of, do you need a ride to the doctor? And there can be lots and lots of that contact, lots of that. And people don't really know each other. They don't really know what the other person thinks. The other person doesn't know what they think. And there's not personal information being exchanged. Yeah. And I think that's key. I think because sometimes people can think like, I'm super close to my mom. And then I'll ask questions and say, oh, okay, well, what do you guys talk about? Or what's interesting to you two? Or, how do you connect? And then what I'm hearing a lot of is just contact. Nothing wrong with that, mm-hmm. but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a deeper understanding of one another, agree to disagree kind of things. Do you talk about important issues? And oftentimes I will ask people that, and they'll say, Oh, no, I don't. I mean, I don't tell them what I think about things because they, I know that that's going to get reactive. They're going to be reactive, or, I won't agree with them about that. So we just don't talk about that. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about parenting. We don't, whatever the hot button stuff is. And then you're left with, well, how close is that contact then? Like, how connected are you to that person if you're not going to share some deeper level information? So I think that's another way to get the point across about the importance of that parental triangle, primary triangle.
And I think it's so important what you're saying is we're not talking about something that happened a long time ago. We're talking about how the relationships continue ongoing and how the emotional processes there impact you and your life.
If I might add the other piece about, blame, because sometimes I think when we start talking about parents, sometimes people are either willing to jump on that wagon because there's a parent they'd like to blame.
Yeah.
Or they are not wanting to go into the world of blame, so they want to stay off of that topic. And so Bowen theory is not at all, the main difference is not that is about understanding the relationship, understanding the other person. No, it's not people being right or wrong, finding someone to blame or avoiding blame. It is about trying to understand another person and where, the differences are, which might be conflicts. Also, that's okay if that includes conflicts, but it isn't about blaming a parent.
Yeah, and getting more comfortable being in that uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking about the work I've done with my family, and I think about where I can most identify that it's made an impact in my nuclear family is where I can see similarities between my marriage and my parents' marriage.
Okay.
And I see that as directly related to parenting. My parents, I guess, had a lot of conflict about parenting. I'd say probably their hottest issue, I've never actually thought about this, but I think their hottest issue was around parenting. And the ways that my husband and I can get in that exact same damn conflict. And I'm the right one, of course. Just I'll be clear about that.
Yeah.
I am right and he is wrong. But how I can, and what's super interesting too is the way I react to my mom is very similar to the way I react to my husband. I just want to check out. Don't go near that hot stove because it's hot. And so, not just learning how to get in there, that it's important, but, maybe it's not just learning to get in there, it's getting in there. When I would much rather run for the hills.
Right.
It's a strong urge in me.
Sure. And I think in all of us, this idea that, the relationship that we have with our parents is paramount in how we see other relationships, how we interpret other relationships, what we do when we're older and have our own agency about how we are in relationships, and whether or not we can look eyes wide open at how our parents communicated with one another, how that influences our thoughts about pairing up or marriage, and how you can do a lot of work as an adult to move through having a more mature relationship with your parents without dragging up every injustice that someone thinks was done to them as children.
That's another big differentiator here. We're not talking about confronting mom and dad for being bad parents.
That's right. That's right.
Talk about
that. Which leads into this idea of, this emotional maturity. And we've talked about that issue before, but it really is about taking responsibility for one's part as an adult and understanding and trying to assess how much do you want to get into with regard to your childhood and your interpretation of your childhood. some people, some families are open to some of that discussion. And here was a thing that happened when I was 10 and I remember it. And, a parent can say, oh yes, I do remember that too. And that was a difficult time and I wasn't thinking straight, or I was having such a hard time with the stress and, the death of my mother or whatever. And people can have those very open, honest, and direct conversations with a parent, and other people can't, or at least they can't initially. It depends on, the status of the relationship where you're starting from with your parent. And some people
I think
baby steps.
Yes. And I think people assume, and I'm one of those people that my family was one of the ones where you cannot talk about that stuff. It would be way too hot of a topic. And I broached the topic several months back where I decided to broach it as in I was only going to talk about me.
Yeah.
And not what was done to me. So it's super personal, I guess, here, but I think that's what's helpful to people. So I said to my mom one morning, and I did this with purpose, that I needed to get to that more personal level in my work on my relationship with them, because we know how to keep it right up here. Right here. We like to laugh. Anyway, I said, I'm so tired of being, of feeling like a scared, angry teenager with you. And, my fear was that she would just blow, stop talking to me, a lot of some things that have happened before. And what happened was just what you just gave an example of, and that she started talking about not necessarily a rough time she was having, but, she was a junior high school teacher and how she had to learn to be tough. And maybe she was just too tough at home because of what she learned in the classroom. And she said a couple other things, but we had this conversation. It's not like I felt like, everything's wonderful afterwards, but I felt like I went into a place that was scary to go into, and I was okay and she was okay. And
sure,
there is a ripple effect or a trickle or whatever you want to call it into the marriage.
Mm-hmm. And I think the idea too that it isn't about fixing, because nothing's broken.
Yeah.
The relationship isn't broken, right? We're not looking to fix things. We're looking to put texture, maybe is the way, put context and texture into the relationship. The perception really isn't they did something wrong or I did something wrong. This is the way we interacted.
Yeah.
This is how this is the dance we did. And if I can look at that, and as you said, speak from an I position, try not to get critical of the other, judgmental of the other, or defensive of self, and just keep, even if the other does that, even if the other gets defensive, keep talking from that I position. And if one could keep that up over time with a parent, it changes the way you interact. It changes the dynamic in the relationship, which I think can be remarkable. But we're not talking about a one-hit wonder. We're not talking about, one or two times and then, you're through it. This is consistent effort over time. And again, baby steps. When people come to me and say, I really have this superficial relationship with my parent. I had this client say it not too long ago. It's just, I see them 3 times a week. We live near each other. We have dinner together. We're just all the time around each other. Yeah. But it's just fluff. Oh, that's the word he used. He said, it's just a fluff relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my suggestion oftentimes to people, which is just one suggestion of many, is that people take an idea and just try to keep the conversation simple. So start with, I like to suggest, and maybe I've said this on another video, I don't know if I have, I like to suggest that people talk about their parents' history. Like back when they were kids. What did you like to do when you were a kid? Which sibling did you hang out with the most? What did you and your friends do? Because it takes out the whole when I knew you, kind of the parenting piece. If there's some concern about people, that people's parents are going to be reactive to talking about the past, thinking that the kid is coming to blame the parent for something that happened when they were kids. Jump over that. You know, how did you and mom meet, or how did you and dad meet, or how, whatever. You know, being able to start conversation with personal information that was from a long time ago. And I think starting with your parents' childhood is just a fun and fascinating place to be that can be neutral.
Yeah.
The parent is not, most people are not going to be on the defensive because you're not asking about, well, you know, what was that thing when I was 12? Remember that thing?
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about like, what did you do when you were 12? Where did you live? What did you, you know, what did you and your friends do? What was, you know, I got my dad talking about like making, what was it? Like scooters out of, you know, like bicycle tires or guns out of bicycle. I mean, you know, just crazy stuff like out in the country in the, you know, early 1940s, you know, it was just kooky, but it was fun. It was enjoyable. It was, you know, interesting. And it was him sharing part of him that wasn't, you know, had nothing in terms of his relationship with me. Because it was all, you know, prior to that.
Yeah. Great way to get personal.
Just one idea, you know, again, of many.
Yeah. And then you wanted to talk about sort of getting, you know, going even further than just your parents and, you know, thinking about this thing, not just your parents and then you and then your kids, but you got grandparents and great grandparents and
aunts and uncles. Aunts and uncles. Yeah.
Spreading it out. So how would you describe the value of really sort of doing that family history?
Yeah. I think much in the way that people will say, well, like, you know, alcoholism runs in a family. And, you know, and again, the bone concept of that would be, first of all, alcohol is you know, an anxiety binder, and people pick up anxiety binders from family members. Sure, they do, behaviorally. So, you know, science has yet to uncover any sort of genetic, there's some ideas about maybe some genetic components or predispositions, you know, but nothing solid in terms of that. And
it's more complex than this gene goes to you and it equals alcohol. It's so much complex.
Exactly. But I get it. When you look at a family history, you might see a good number of alcoholics. So how do you make sense of that? Well, I think, again, being on the level of understanding versus blaming, you can look through a family and see who might have managed their anxieties with alcohol. And what do we know about that? You know, and sometimes you know it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes all you know about a family member, an extended family member, might be that they were a drinker. You know, so, you know, again, context. Is there any way to get some more information there? And maybe there is and maybe there isn't. But the idea also, so that's just one example of how we can look at the larger family diagram and get some information about our ancestors. Another idea is that we can use that information to make some contacts with people that we just, you know, we just don't know. Again, we just don't really have any kind of relationship with them. Many families, I think this is not just true for my family, it is true for my family, but many families, there's siblings getting together when their kids are little, and, you know, having holidays together, things like that. And then when those kids grow, so like another generation, there gets to be less and less contact with that extended family piece. I think that little kids are oftentimes the glue, especially if families live close by. And then as those kids get older and they have kids, and then, you know, then oftentimes people are kind of clumping up again together, you know, with just their family, their spouse, their children, their grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And that extended piece, you know, the cousin, first cousin, second cousin, third, that sort of can get evaporated pretty easily, and understandably, because life is busy, people move, it, you know, it's just complicated. But I think trying to keep some pieces together in terms of that can be very helpful. And so what I mean by is that we just often lose contact with people. We just lose some contact, but we don't have any issue. We don't have any, you know, disagreement or distress necessarily in those relationships. So that's what in bone theory is called a distant relationship, right? It's not cut off. Cut off is there's, you know, an issue in which people have decided not to be in contact with one another for an extended period of time. We're talking about distance, which is not really necessarily that there's any conflict. There's no depth either, but there's no conflict. It's just, you just lose track of one another. And I
And
think in every family, we can see extended families where people have lost track of family members.
yes, yeah. And I think you miss out on a resource, even with cutoff. With cutoff, you assume that your extended family is not a resource, but more a hindrance or a challenge, which they are. But
Yeah.
you miss that they're a resource as well. But even in these distant relationships, if something does happen, horribly stressful events or whatever, or just the day-to-day stress, you miss the resource of spreading the anxiety around or the problem solving or the offers of help or the whatever that can be there.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that reaching out sometimes to distant family or to family that's been distanced is can be also alarming or frightening for people. They don't know how to do that. They are, yes, I know my uncle, but I don't really know him. I wouldn't just pick up the phone and call him.
Yeah.
I get information, about him through my mom or through my dad, which is fine. But as adults then, that was fine when we were kids, right? As adults, can I take some responsibility myself for that relationship and not just hear the information, through the grapevine of family members, because at some point the generation above you is not going to be there. And so, you might have an uncle, whereas you don't have your parents any longer. Well, then how are you in contact with that uncle? And I think that's just an interesting and important piece. Again, they don't have to be distressing, relationships, but they can be a little bit awkward. I introduced talking to an uncle that, again, just a distant relationship, no issues whatsoever, maybe 3 years ago. That's probably about right. And I was nervous. Like, well, okay, I got the phone number and I got what am I gonna say? And I thought, okay, just bite the bullet, just make the call. And it's a lot of small talk. Nothing wrong with small talks. That's the baby steps.
Yeah.
And slowly over time, I don't think he's ever called me in 3 years. Maybe he has called me once. And I don't, again, that's the whole keeping score. We don't have to, not call because they don't call us. We can get over ourselves there and just keep making the effort. And over time, we've had some deeper conversations, which is nice, but they are initiated, by me. But again, I'm taking responsibility for that. I don't need to keep score because it's for me. I'm making the contact because I think that's a good thing for me. It's probably also a good thing for him, but it's sort of a selfish move in that way that it is for self.
Yeah.
I want to be more in contact with extended family members that I have lost contact with and have distant relationships with. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to own that and I'm going to do it. So again, a piece that can get in people's way is that, keeping score. I'm always the one to reach out. I'm always the one to, okay, well, if, I get it, but you have no contact. So that's the other choice, is like either I'm going to do it or it's maybe not going to happen or it will happen very infrequently. And you can choose that. It just seems to me that I might have a richer understanding of my family and the family I came from if I make the effort. And since I would like to have a richer understanding of my life and my family, I'm going to make the effort.
Yeah. I mean, doing it for self is absolutely key. If you're doing this to help somebody else or to be the glue for the family or to take care of the family in some way, you will burn out for sure. I see how much time we have. We have just a couple more minutes. I want to throw in here another value piece. I'm reading a book right now called You Can Go Home Again, I think it's called, by Monica McGoldrick.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I've mentioned that in these, but what she's doing in the book is kind of a Bowen diagram of famous families. So Ben Franklin, the President Adams families, and the Brontes, and the Brontes were the ones that fascinated me the most. And I think because one of the things that gets highlighted in that family is the impact of death of young children, let's say, in previous generations, and the ways that can invisibly trickle down to the next generation. None of the Brontes survived. None of them, except the father.
Wow.
All the offspring weren't able to actually leave home. They were brilliant people. I mean, they you know, a couple of the, I think it's 2 or maybe 3 of the daughters wrote some of the most popular, classic literature, and they couldn't leave home. And so
none of them, I think none of them reproduced, or if they did, their children died. No reproduced.
none of them left home even. So, you know, for me personally, I was able to I've looked deeper and deeper into my family history. I don't know if I've gone 6 or 7 generations back now, but the amount of early death of the men, the breadwinners, having accidents, industrial type accidents on both my parents' side of the family, it's profound. And they're not always industrial. Sometimes there's cancer or something like that, but it's the early death of breadwinner. I've also found that on both sides of my parents' family, the deaths of little children, 4-year-old girls, one on each side, and one not that far back. And so McGoldrick talks a lot about when the family doesn't or can't talk about these things and integrate these processes, the ways that passes the anxiety down invisibly. And, you know, you're living with anxiety and you have no idea why or what's going on or whatever. When you can begin to pull out this history, it's wow. So that's a value too that I think.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's that idea that we don't know what we don't know. So you know, if I'm having a lot of anxiety and I'm trying everything I can to manage that anxiety and there's still a sizable gap, take a chance, look into some family history. You know, really, could it hurt? I mean, I don't think it could. The other piece is, I wanted to just point this book out. Victoria Harrison came up with this. I don't know if you have this, but came up with this book. It really could help people if they want to put together, you know, family history stuff and family diagrams, what, you know, Miriam and I talk about a lot, the family diagram piece and what most bone therapists will use during sessions. It's a really helpful book. So the Family Diagram and Family Research, an illustrated guide to tools for working on differentiation of self and one's family. And again, Victoria Harrison. It's a thin little, you know, booklet kind of, and it just very helpful ways of, you know, if you're interested in kind of digging into that, and you have a bone therapist, or if you don't, you just want to kind of do some of this, you know, digging around on your own. I think that would be, you know, encouraged, you know. And
great resource.
Good resource.
Ancestry.com is a great resource. That's where I started.
Okay.
Oh, I already had some of the diagramming like training in grad school and all that, but Ancestry can be super helpful. So. Any final words, Kelly?
I don't have any. I don't think I ever. Go for it. No, I don't.
Right.
We don't want to sound like cheerleaders, right? We don't want to encourage, you know, people just have to digest this stuff themselves. If it makes sense to you, I would contemplate it. I would think about it, roll it over your head, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's fine. But if some of this, you know, makes some sense to you, and you could carve out a little bit of time to be thinking about it, asking parents questions, again, that can be helpful. Asking, where did their parents grow up? That can be, again, a way of having conversation with parents that doesn't have to do with you and them directly. It can be another way of getting to know, you know, your parents a little bit better by trying to get their take on their parents.
And I guess I would say, don't go in there alone. Have some idea of Bowen theory. You're not going in there like without any, you know, thinking. Because it can be,
and there's so many resources, you know, for people. The, you know, the website at the Georgetown Center has you know, so many books and articles and podcasts and videos and just, you know, everything.
So thebowencenter.org, and then what's the website for the Chicago Center?
That's the Center for Family Consultation.org.
Okay.
So the Family for CFC, Center for Family Consultation, but our website is the Center for Family Consultation.org.
Okay, I'll post it.
Resources. We have an extensive library there as well, and blogs. You know, the faculty have put blogs together, so that's on there. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks, Kelly. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.